Welcome to this Considered Opinions podcast.
I'm Dougal.
And I'm Celia. Thank you for joining us. In the book 1984, there is a conversation that goes like this. Don't you see that the whole aim of NewSpeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible because there will be no words in which to express it. Every concept that can ever be needed will be expressed by exactly one word, with its meaning rigidly defined and all its subsidiary meanings rubbed out and forgotten. That quote really sums up the subject that we want to discuss today, which is about reclaiming the language, because we've lost a lot of the original meanings of our language and we've had them narrowed down to mean specific things of a political nature. And I think that the insidious meaning behind that is that we will, at some point, if it is allowed to go on, at some point we will be unable to express anything other than the concepts that are acceptable to the establishment, because our language will have been lost. It will have been narrowed down so much. And there are some words I feel like we have lost already. And there are other words that I feel like are on the cusp that could be lost.
I know a word that was lost already. I remember my third form Latin teacher gasping in exasperation as the classroom fell about laughing, and he was just saying, "What's wrong with the word gay? It's a perfectly normal word. Has this been stolen and twisted like every other word?" And he was right. It's been changed. It no longer means what it used to mean.
Yes. And I think that's a good example. There are other words that I feel like have already been taken and now mean one specific thing, completely different from their original meaning. And for those words, I feel like it would be too much of an uphill battle to try and bring back the original meanings, because it's so deeply embedded in our minds as a society. They've gone in a lot of ways. But there are other words that are on the cusp, and I think that becoming aware of this, if we get those words, we can rescue them. And
good
also
words. Words that have good meanings, wholesome meanings that we can use productively and usefully.
Well, one of those words, for example, is the word kind. Now, it is more than a perfectly good word. It's actually a hugely important word, because true kindness and being kind is deeply, deeply necessary to society. But if it is stolen, if you can't say to somebody, be kind, or I want to be kind, because
or that was kind,
or that kindness is important, then a huge part of how our culture and society and we as human beings function successfully is based on the kindness between people. And that makes a better world for us all. And what I found now is that if you say anything about kindness, particularly in New Zealand with what a former Prime Minister did, people will rear back going, "Oh, don't say that word, it's horrible."
Yes, so the politicization of the word kindness. And we've spoken in the past about the Perchik problem, where everything is made into a political problem and how that's a problem. That in itself is a problem. Here's an example of that, where the word kindness or kind has been politicized and the definition is being deliberately changed.
And I think you were saying that she's going around the world now
she is
talking about
the politics of kindness, her policy of kindness
that she invented, and that it belongs to her. And
it isn't kind at all.
It's the antithesis of true kindness. What she is doing, what she has done, and her behaviour is the antithesis of kindness.
Correct.
But if we associate that word with that person, then we've lost it. We have to reclaim it. We have to say, no, actually, that word doesn't belong to her. That word means something good. And that word is a concept that we want to have in our culture, we want to have in our society. So I think that it's important that we then go, right, these words that are now on the cusp, we can go either way. If we choose to focus on and keep associating it with her, rather than saying, no, this is a good thing and I'm going to use it in its proper sense,
yes,
then we've lost it. But we can actually choose. And the thing is, it's actually going to take all of us individually, and we're going to have to encourage each other.
Yes.
So that, when you might not feel like saying it, you say it and encourage each other. Yes, that's what it really means. You're using it correctly.
So this is an example of the BBC method of cultural change, is that we're changing what we
are
doing, and that then has ripple effects out in our families, in our workplaces, in our communities.
Yes.
And that is the bottom-up way of basically reinvigorating the culture.
And making the culture that we want. I think the culture is a summation of human behaviour.
Yes.
And so how we behave is going to create that culture that we want, that we feel like we've lost, but we can create going forward new.
So have we fully answered the question as to why language is important?
Well, I think that language is important because he who controls the language controls the world.
Yes.
So if we allow somebody else to control or to change the definitions and change the meanings and control what words we can and cannot use, then we are living in their framework. We're living according
Yes.
to their rules, and they're the ones calling the shots.
We've given up the high ground of language, and then they therefore can control what they see as a battlefield. Now, we don't want to see it as a battlefield, but the establishment do.
So it might be better to look at it rather than the high ground, but to look at it as we've given up the playing field of language.
Yes.
And made it into a battlefield.
Yes.
Or allowed it to become a battlefield.
Yes.
Because it can be used as a control mechanism in that if you allow it to be.
Again, going back to that, people trying to turn kindness into a policy, when you actually read their articles, they will say something that is true about kindness, and then in the next breath, they will say something that's very mean and nasty and divisive, and plays into the whole oppressor paradigm. So again, it's about framing it in a warlike way instead of framing it in a friendship way or a community-spirited way.
Yeah, yeah. And there are so many loaded words now that I do feel like are lost already. These ones might be too hard to reclaim, but they are recent examples of words that have become too loaded to use in day-to-day. Things like the words diversity, marginalised.
Yes.
Even, I think, a big one is equity versus equality.
Yes. Well, I thought equity was how much ownership you have in a particular asset, but maybe that's just me.
And also, what does equality mean? Previously you might have said, I think everybody should have equality, equal opportunity. But
yes.
No, equality means you've got to ensure the equality of outcome, equal outcomes.
Yes.
And that is a subtle shift that happened very
surreptitiously.
Surreptitiously, yes. And
I mean, there are people who have pushed back against that particular one.
There are.
Which is good.
And that's fantastic. But I think that is why it's so important for us to all be aware of it.
It just underlines the point.
Because they will push back at it. And it might be big names. It might be big names like Jordan Peterson. Whoever it is who's pushing back about the meaning of words.
But it doesn't just have to be those.
It can't be just those. They can't do it alone.
Because culture comes from the summation of everyone's actions, not just a few at the top. It's coming up from the bottom, and therefore we all need to do our part.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing is that we will think, oh, they're doing something. Somebody's speaking out about it. Somebody with name recognition, or it's had 50 million views on YouTube, so they are it's dealt with. I don't have to worry about it. But no, because they could be, if be 50 million views on YouTube, fine. But if we are not making the change in our behaviour, we
Yes.
are not actually living it, they're irrelevant. Name recognition or the number of viewerships online don't create culture.
Yes. And what we are not saying also is to be confrontational, combative about it either.
Oh, no.
It really, if we want to retain the true meaning of the word kindness, we need to do it with kindness.
Absolutely. It's not about getting into an argument with somebody. Oh, you use the word kindness wrong, or you use the word equality wrong. That's not the point of it. The point is to make sure that we don't shy away from using words that are being co-opted, that are being, in some ways you could see it as a steal, that they are taking these words and they're co-opting them to mean something different that we actually don't want to be part of, so we let the words go. We just avoid using them. The English language has enough words that we can make do without certain ones.
Is part of it questioning or trying to seek clarification about what people mean by words?
It could be, and I think that equality is a good example for that, because if you feel like somebody is shifting the definition, questioning a little bit, do you mean equality of opportunity or do you mean equality of outcome?
Or using kindness, people might say a phrase that assumes a particular action is kind. So it might be, well, it's only kind to send aid to overseas countries. Or is it? Because we've seen with the recent USAID scandal, is that aid actually going to where they say it's going?
Well, also it can be things like, is it the old proverb of if you teach a man to fish or if you give a man a fish? And
yes.
So is it kind to give him the fish and then walk away? I mean, that you might say, yeah, that's kind. But then we've got levels of kindness. Is it kinder to teach him to fish?
Yes.
So
yes.
I think that there is questions and understanding about what these words mean to individuals, but also there are actually definitions. There are actually meanings to these words. And when we make them mean only one thing, particularly if it's a skewed thing, then we've lost that word.
Yes, yes. And the Overton window narrows, and the scope of thought narrows,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden we find ourselves in a mental prison that we have allowed, or even you might argue consented to, simply because we haven't questioned when words are being used in a way that they oughtn't to be.
Well, it makes me think of, you know, those fish traps where fish can swim into essentially a basket.
Yes.
And it's all smooth going in, but they can't get out because it's
yes.
prickly. It's like that.
If you accept someone's framing of the word, you allow the conversation to go, and it's easy in that respect, but now you've changed the very definition of the word.
Yeah. And
it's a different kind of word.
It's a slow bit by bit, like every time words are used incorrectly or only to mean one thing, and every time I think the big thing for us is to not to necessarily pick a fight with somebody and question them, but just make sure that we use these words regularly in the correct way. We use them. We don't shy away from saying the word kind, or shy away from using words like responsibility,
yes.
or beauty,
yes.
or hard work, those sorts of things, because we don't want people to feel uncomfortable, or because they might read into it something that we...
Yes, well, according to the Smithsonian, hard work is a white supremacist principle. You know, and what did the Disinformation Project in New Zealand talk about? They talked about, you know, if someone has braids in their hair and likes healthy food, take a step back.
Flowers in your hair.
Flowers in your hair.
Yeah.
Used to be a hippie principle, that one. You go to San Francisco and put flowers in your hair. How times have changed.
I think that's the thing, is that these definition shifts. I mean, language always evolves.
Yes.
I'm not saying that language doesn't evolve or that things start to mean different.
But it could evolve for the better or for the worse.
Well, it depends. Is it evolving naturally, or is it a top-down politicized imposition, like
Yes.
kind has been, or like you're not supposed to suggest self-responsibility.
Yes.
Those sorts of things are rather shame-based, top-down, purposeful changes. Whereas if you were to say, I was talking about it with somebody earlier today, in America they have some words that are no longer used in England, but they are older English words. So for example, Americans and Charles Dickens will use the word muffler, whereas today in England you will say scarf. And in New Zealand, a muffler is what you put on your car exhaust.
Yes.
So that's a natural change of language, how language has evolved naturally, but there's nothing politicized about that. It's not taking language away from people. If you wanted to say that a muffler is as a scarf, that's a perfectly reasonable thing. You can still read Charles Dickens and know what he means.
Yes.
So what we're talking about specifically with reclaiming the language is about not allowing words to become politicized and to become political clubs, if you like, to beat people with.
Yes.
And that will take all of us. Also, along with using verbal clubs, we have to be aware. I mean, there's a proverb that says, your words have the power of life and death. We have to be aware of the language that we're using and being careful to not allow it to be stolen from us, to be used as a club to beat people over the head with.
Yes.
And reclaim our language because it belongs to us, everybody, the people.
Thank you for joining us for this Considered Opinions podcast. We look forward to seeing you again next time, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe.